Hello students, I am Sunil Ranjan and I'm an English teacher. Now here in this session, I have the summary of the story of my life from chapter 11 to chapter 13. And here I begin. Time passed by and it was autumn when Helen returned to her southern home. She was very happy with memories of the days spent in the north. Her life there was full of motion as little insects which crowd a whole existence into one brief day. She spent the autumn months with her family at Fern Quarry, their summer cottage on a mountain about 14 miles from Tuscumbia. There were small rooms in the cottage, and round the house was a wide piazza where they worked, ate, and played most of the time. The evenings in the Fern Quarry were pleasant, as there were many visitors who used to play cards or spend their time in talk by the campfire. Generally, the men talked about their wonderful feats with fowl, fish, ducks, turkeys, etc. They all were hunters and they shouted, "Tomorrow to the chase," before they went to sleep. There was a lot of noise of the heavy steps of hunters in the morning as they were getting ready to go out for hunting. Meanwhile, the others made preparation for a barbecue. When the excitement of the preparation was at its height, the hunters came back hot and weary with not a single kill. They seemed disappointed but soon forgot about it to a towner feast of veal and roast pig. Helen had a pony also at Fern Quarry whom she called Black Beauty, and she often went riding on it. She enjoyed the time spent on riding. At the foot of the mountain there was a railroad which attracted children towards it because of the trains whizzing by. One day Mildred, Miss Sullivan, and Helen lost their path in the woods there and wandered for hours to find it. Suddenly Mildred drew a trestle which would have been a shortcut to their home. Helen felt for the rails with her toe without being afraid and got on very well until she heard Mildred cry, "I see the train." They immediately climbed down and the rain tumbled by. It was a narrow escape, but she couldn't forget the experience. Helen spent almost every winter in the north after her first visit to Boston. Once she went on a visit to a New England village, and there she had her first experience of snowfall. The earth seemed benumbed by its icy touch. The grass and bushes were turned into icicles. They all sat around the great fire and told merry tales to each other. The snowfall stopped after 3 days. Everything looked like figures in a marble frieze. As the days passed on, the trees lost their ice covering, and the bushes became bare once the sun shone brightly. The favorite amusement during the winter was tobogganing. They would get on their toboggan. Somebody would shove them and they would swoop down the lake to the opposite bank. It was great fun. Now, Helen tells us how she learned to speak and what effort she made for it. It was in the spring of 1890 that Helen learned to speak, though she had been practicing it for months. The feeling to produce audible sounds had always been strong within her. She would put one hand on her throat and with the other hand she tried to feel the movement of her lips. When she was in her mother's lap, she would move her hand on her face to feel how her lips moved. It gave her immense joy. Before she lost her sight and hearing, she was fast learning to speak. She also remembered the first word that she uttered was water. She pronounced it wah wah. Then her illness snatched her sight and hearing. Then with the help of Miss Sullivan, she practiced to communicate, feeling letters with her fingers. But she was not satisfied with it and was very eager to speak with her mouth. At last her efforts bore fruit and she learned to speak in 1890. In 1890, Mrs. Lamson, who had taught Laura Bridgman and had just returned from a visit to Norway and Sweden, came to meet her. she told Helen how a blind and deaf girl of Norway named Ranil was taught to speak. The story of Mrs. Lamson infused Helen with a new hope, and she resolved that she would also learn to speak. Her teacher, Miss Sullivan, took her for advice and assistance to Miss Sarah Fuller. The kind lady took upon herself the responsibility to teach her. Thus, she began her education under the guidance of Miss Sarah Fuller in March 1890. Since the teacher and the taught both were devoted to attain the single aim, they achieved success. After a long practice, Helen pronounced the first sentence. It was warm. How happy she was can only be imagined by the deaf and blind child who had uttered a word for the first time. But it must not be supposed that she could really speak as we speak. She had learnt only the elements of a speech. Only Miss Sullivan and Miss Sarah Fuller could understand what she uttered, but most people would not understand her for hours. She was left only with one way, and that was of practice. She practiced speaking for hours, and Miss Sullivan always assisted her in her practice. Sometimes she was very tired and disappointed, but soon hope would come to her. Besides the thought that a great and pleasant change was about to come in her life dispelled the dark clouds of despair in the same way as dewdrops disappear on the emergence of the sun. Finally, her efforts and the affection and devotion of her teachers forced fate to bow to her, and Helen learned to speak. Now she was impatient to show her achievements to her parents, sisters, and friends. And then came the day when Helen reached Escambia railway station, where her parents, sister, and friends were present to receive her. The spring season, bloom, joviality, youthful prank, and beauty all returned to their lives. The door to a new life had been opened to all. So this is the end of the summary, and I hope, students, you have understood what I explained, and I gave you the summary of it. So if you have subscribed to my channel, very good. If you haven't, I suggest you to subscribe to my channel so that in the future videos you will be able to know more and more, and we'll be together. Thank you.